I want to make sure, I know most of you saw my wife and met my wife, but is she sitting around here someplace? I want her, there she is over there in the corner. She made it. And of course, you met Rand last night, and our oldest son, Ronnie, is here with his wife, Peggy, and Ronnie is the chairman of the board for Campaign for Liberty. There he is. You know, the family is competitive, and Rand and Ronnie brought that up last night. They're competitive in sports and golf and these sort of things, the important things in life. And but, you know, in politics, it's competitive too. You know, in the media in particular right now, they really want to, you know, get interviews with me. Not so much they want to learn something about the Federal Reserve, but they want to, you know, pick and try to drive wedges between me and Rand. But it's a bit competitive because Rand does a really good job, you know, and people come up and ask me, why don't you do it as well as he does? He's so much better and this sort of thing. Well, I'll keep improving. But you know what? But when he went out and he did something that I think everybody knows about. I think it's called a filibuster. You remember that? And people have the nerve to come up and ask me, they say, how come you never filibustered? I said, well, maybe it's because I was in the House and not the Senate. So, but I'm still very competitive, so I can't go to the Senate. And if I had done it in the House, you know, the Sergeant of Arms would have come and arrested me and thrown me out. So I couldn't do that. So I've decided that since I'm a competitive person, I'm going to do my filibuster tonight, and I hope you can sit for a long time here tonight. But don't worry, not 13 hours. If I see you sleeping or walking out, I'll get tired real fast. But it is really great to be here tonight and have a nice reception. And I thought the panel was very kind. They were very kind in what they had to say, and I found that, you know, very fascinating and interesting because it was a large part of my life and my family's life to be involved in politics. When I went into politics, and actually the first time I ran for office was in '74, won in '76, and then after a few years, I thought I didn't want to give up medicine, so I went back to medicine for 12 years, and that's when you know, I ran again in '96. So it's been you know, a large part of what I've done, but I've never seen it as a career. I've seen it always as secondary, and the staff gave me a lot of credit, and change has occurred. We do know there is a revolution going on, by the way. And I'm given some credit, but it really is much more deeply involved than just one individual. It's what's been going on for 30 years. It's started, I think, the modern day revolution and resurgence of liberty. It was with Leonard Read with the Free Foundation. And he was somebody I discovered in the 1960s and started getting literature from him. So this has been going on for a long time, and yet I think it's very, very encouraging on what's happening today, and partially because you know, the Campaign for Liberty has contributed a lot, and you have contributed a lot, and that's why I think we're going to do well. You know, the big argument on the Hill right now is anger at the Republicans that would even dare think about closing down the government. And even some of the conservatives, and they're thoughtful conservatives, they say, well, you don't gain anything, you're not going to change anything, and you lose too much political capital, those types of arguments. And they've asked me a little bit about it, not that I have a vote in it anymore, but my assumption is that it would probably be better to close down the government than let the whole system break down. That's what our real worry should be. I do get annoyed with the disingenuous programs of the Republicans still, because, right now they're talking about standing firm and closing down the government because they want to stop Obamacare. Well, we should have never had it, and it should be abolished, and, all those arguments. But the whole thing is behind the scenes, if you look carefully at the budget, guess what? They're not giving up one penny in the military-industrial complex. So we have some liberals that I worked with that are willing to cut some of the military, and now we have the Republicans speaking out loudly about not further damaging health care through Obamacare. But why can't we come together and cut both the military and the medical program? Our country, in the early settlements, made some decisions about in which direction we would go, and some of the decisions were made were very positive. In 1620, of course, when the Plymouth colony arrived in William Bradford, the governor, they left England, and they had 140 people on a ship. A couple died along the way, but when they landed in Massachusetts, within several months, half of them died. And things didn't get better, because one thing they did was they said, we have to do this together. We are a collective, and we have to take care of each other. So everybody works together and put all the food in this place, and we'll distribute it. And it was a managed economy, and things didn't get better. The first year was a disaster. The second year got worse. And the third year, guess what Bradford said? We're going to turn the land owned over to private ownerships, and you go and fend for yourself. And guess what? Prosperity occurred after that. So that was a good trend. They tried socialism. They found out that failed rather quickly, and there was a growing attitude that in America you had self-reliance and self-responsibility. You cared for yourself. You couldn't depend on the government to take care of one from cradle to grave, and we did rather well. And then there was the resentment toward the British, and we got rid of the British tyranny, and it even got better after that. A Constitution was written, did a fairly good job, far from perfect, but at least there were many years where we did thrive. The infractions, though, occurred that were predicted by the anti-federalists, and I think the real problem started in 1913. It's been downhill ever since. So if we had 1 year that we could repeal, let's repeal 1913. Then we wouldn't have the Woodrow Wilson foreign policy. We wouldn't have the Woodrow Wilson's infraction of our civil liberties. We wouldn't have the income tax, and we wouldn't have the Federal Reserve System either. But in this last 100 years, we have generally strayed a long way, from really understanding as Americans and as our system as a whole, understanding, believing in, and promoting the cause of liberty. I think liberty has continued to shrink. Government has continued to grow. The financial system is worse. The middle class is smaller. And we're now trying to manage an empire with money we don't have. And a solution for that could be rather simple to get us directed in the other way, and that is, let's give up on the empire and quit wasting our time, our money, and the lives of our kids. Much was talked about earlier about what I was doing in Washington and how things changed. But in my own mind, first, I didn't expect to go to Washington. I just wanted to speak out, as a way of verbalizing something that I didn't think was being heard. So I was surprised, and I actually went to Washington. But I would only go on my terms, that I would tell them that I was going to be very radical. I was going to take my oath of office seriously and actually vote that way. So I held in high esteem the oath of office as well as the pledges to the constituents. I won't raise taxes, this sort of thing. And also to use my very best moral judgment when there was a decision to be made elsewhere. So I thought that would be it. Then I thought, well, if I do a really good job and stick to my guns, because I really don't need a job, I didn't think I would be here, I want to see what's going to happen. I am going to vote down the line the way I believe I'm supposed to. And I thought, well, then I won't be reelected and I can go home and say, see, I did my part. You know, I'm going home and people don't want to hear this stuff. But I was surprised, you know, that lo and behold, you know, I was reelected on those terms. But then I still thought over the years, you know, I got, after 4 terms, I got a little bit annoyed with the whole system and wanted to do medicine again. Went back in 96, and I thought, well, I'll do the same thing, but I wouldn't expect a whole lot to happen. A lot of people ask me, didn't you get frustrated with all those people and working with those people and not getting anything done and all that? I said, I never really did get frustrated. I just didn't really have a lot of high expectations. I didn't think I was going to save the world and they were going to listen to me, and I was right. They didn't listen to me, and I wasn't going to participate. I wasn't going to play their games of trading votes and raising money and becoming a big-time chairman. So I wasn't interested in that. So then I thought the most important thing would be to at least leave a record, do my very best to understand the issue and get the very best kind of people to help me. Of course, their job was easy. All they had to do was read the first line and say, that's unconstitutional. You can't do that. So I thought leaving a record would be worthwhile, but I think things change way beyond my expectations because it did take a bit of lobbying and work and effort to get me to enter that race in 2007 for the 2008 election. And it started off rather slowly, but there was one moment, I don't believe they mentioned that in the panel, but there was one moment in that campaign where things changed dramatically, even though at that particular moment they predicted, Ron Paul is done, you'll never hear another word from him because he's way out of it when it comes to foreign policy, and that was the Giuliani moment. Instead, a lot of people used that as a moment where they started to pay attention and they shifted their views. And ironically, after a few years, they said that was the moment that Giuliani peaked out and never recovered his political career. So these things have worked beyond my expectations, and it was just the coming together of certain events. The free market think tanks, the people who've been doing the work and the writing, the Austrian economic teachings, the Mises Institute, and the very other groups. A lot of people out there did have their minds changed already, but we were able to galvanize and bring it about, and with excitement. I cannot tell you how surprised I was and how pleased I was when early on, it probably was in 07 or early 08, we had a debate in Detroit. We went over to the University of Michigan for a rally, and it was a big turnout. And they said, well, University of Michigan, you know, they're liberals. And so we went over, and it was noisy and exciting, and I was late because we were delayed in the debate, but they waited around, and they wanted to bring up the subject of the Federal Reserve. And I, of course, mentioned it, and to demonstrate what they thought about it, they started taking these Federal Reserve notes out and burning them. And I thought, well, the colleges were alive and well, and believe me, they have been alive and well since. There's been this great transition, and we had a youth movement, and it led to the YAL organization and Jeff Frazee. And that's such an encouraging thing to me to see what Jeff has done with YAL and how many chapters he has around the campuses. So that should give us all hope that things will change, because you have to change the people's minds before you can change the people in Washington. And that is what's happening right now, and that's why we should be excited. In order to do this, I've applied this to myself, and it was some advice that I got from Leonard Reed, is the best thing you can do when you're interested, when you all of a sudden say, you know, this idea of liberty, the complete understanding of it, not pieces of it, when you put it together, it's really very exciting. But Leonard Reed had a couple bits of advice, and one was that your responsibility is for yourself. You know, if you want to change the world, you change yourself. And you want to understand what liberty is, where it comes from, not from the government. It's natural, God-given rights that we have, and what it really means in economics and foreign policy and civil liberties. Learn it and be able to defend it. And then there'll be a job someplace. There'll be something that'll come to you in your own mind, or somebody will come and use you to do it, but there's always going to be a job. And the other thing that he emphasized, and I think is good advice for all of us, is the approach. It should never be an authoritarian, I know better, you do it my way. Some of the demagoguing that goes on and the yelling and the screaming. The one thing that I don't think I ever did, because I purposely tried never to do it, was ever mention, oh, the president did this, and the Democrats did this, and this sort of thing. I think that I always thought that was missing the point, because I didn't deal with that system. I was always talking to somebody else, believing that if people changed or heard something and it sounded reasonable, they would change their minds. And that is what I think is happening because of the educational efforts and all the things going on. But there's a couple other things that's helping us. One is the proof of the failure of this system, the proof of the failure of what we've been doing. Not only do I think about that in terms of our current administration, but the Republican and the Democrat administrations have been going on for a long time. Not only that, it's the Keynesian economic model. It's a failure. The socialist model, it's failed. Just think of in our lifetime, you know, the major event of the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned, especially political economic event, was the collapse of the Soviet system. It just dissipated, not because we had to attack them and fight them. They had 30,000 missiles, and we have to be worried, and I resent it very much that we spend so much time and energy worrying about a bomb that doesn't exist in one particular country, and we were able to live through the dangerous period of the Soviets having 30,000, and they failed because they had a deeply flawed economic policy, and it has got us to the point where really people don't talk about, well, what we now need is communism and pure socialism. What we needed and what happened came out of the downfall of the Cold War was this moderation, you know, this mixture of things, this Keynesianism and intervention in the economy and the planning and central banking. Inflation is and debt is good, borrowing is okay. It's ending. And that means there's an opening there, there's a vacuum there, and it's going to be filled by liberty. That is what happened in 08 and 09 when the crisis came. People started looking elsewhere, and the groundwork had been laid, and all of a sudden. And Norm had mentioned that I talked about the housing bubbles. Others did too. I wasn't the only one out there. Anybody who understood Austrian economics understood the NASDAQ bubble and the housing bubble. But then all of a sudden people started looking and paying attention and saying, you know, even though they never gave credibility in Washington and saying, oh, why don't we talk to the people who predicted this? No, they kept talking to the Keynesians, and the Keynesians said, yes, we're having trouble. They wouldn't admit it came from the government is too big, government spent too much, there was too much debt, they were borrowing too much and printing too much money. What did they do? They went back to even doing more. Interest rates were too low for too long, so they lowered them to negative. And they thought it was going to help. It's not helping, and people are desperately looking. I think this is why young people are so energized by this alternative, because they've just gone through college and they're spending all this money. They've been taught this silly economics in their college, and they can't get jobs, and they want some real answers. Well, tell you what, the freedom philosophy can give all of us real answers to the problems we face today. Not only does it give us our answer to our economic crisis by looking at a different economic model, it gives us our answer to our foreign policy mess that we have, of non-interventionists, mind their own business, take the advice of the founders, friendship and trade and defending our country but not getting involved in these civil wars that we have no business getting involved in. So that's what the kind of the policy we would have if we would accept these principles. And also, the freedom philosophy gives you the answer to and bring people together, bring the left and the right together, the progressives and the libertarians and constitutional together, and to combat this insanity of allowing our government to know every single thing we do every minute of the day. That's evil. I was on a talk show this week, and somebody said, what do you think we should do with the NSA? And he said, what would you do with it? I said, get rid of it. Now, the amount of information the government has on us is astounding, and I think the people are waking up on this issue. They're waking up on the war issue. It is already, leadership is very important. There's only a small number of people, and people in a crowd like this will be able to express these views. But there's leadership, but they have to still convert the majority to go along or at least accept it. And when that occurs, then they send the messages to Washington to demand it. This even occurs in dictatorship. If the prevailing attitude of the people is such that the king or the dictator or the Congress or whoever, if they're doing wrong, they will get the message. And I think that's what's happened on this Syria vote. The people spoke out. But who was championing this? The Democrats and the Republicans, Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner. They were both for this, supporting the president. But the people said no, and we don't know the final story here, but I consider that very, very encouraging that the American people stood up and said, don't vote to go to war. And I think it was the same type of coalition on the vote that Justin and Mosh brought up and they almost won. It was the coalition, once again, of Republicans and Democrats who were not locked into the partisanship of defending their parties and defending the status quo. But both parties defend the same foreign policy. Management styles, a little bit different. They both defend the Fed, and decide on how fast to print the money. Both defend deficits. Neither one comes out, or we wouldn't have deficits if we had Republicans in. They'd get rid of the deficit, wouldn't they? They never do. So they all believe really basically in the same principle. It's anti-liberty. But there's a fertile field out there. The transition is existing. We're in the midst of a revolutionary period. And I think it's more than just a blip. Not only just a blip in our own history. I think it can be a blip in history, all of history. Because history is so young. When you think about it, the cosmos, the universe had been around for billions of years, but people recorded history that we're knowledgeable about, 5,000 or 6,000 years, and that's been it. And what has been the most important part of the 5,000 or 6,000 years as far as advancement goes, scientific advancement? Probably the last 150 years or 100 years. Just think about it. Just think of what's happened in the last 20 years with technology. The real tragedy has been that the more technology we have, the more the technology was used to enhance war and fighting and killing. And today we have an opportunity to take technology and use it and get around the government and get to the people and get the people to resist and object to what our governments have been doing. And And I don't think this revolution, a lot of people who are involved in the revolution are independent and Republicans, but a true revolution is just like the opposition had been winning. The Keynesians, the interventionists, the Woodrow Wilson people for 100 years. It pervades both parties. I think that a new idea like this, a refinement of the understanding of liberty, will not only infiltrate both parties and all the people, but I think it's going to be around the world. I think this is alive and well because we can talk to everybody now. And the main responsibility for us to have this work would be something the founders attempted, but it didn't work. It is never grant power to the executive branch or any government to do these things, that the people are supposed to take care of themselves. They tried to make it strictly limited, but immediately after the passage of the Constitution, especially after the Civil War, then all of a sudden the expansion of the executive branch occurred and the people reneged, and especially in the Congress, and gave up on their responsibilities. But the Congress and the government reflects the people. I can't say that more than enough, that if we spread a message, if there's an understanding, people know what liberty is, know how to defend it, and also then implement it. That to me is really the solution, to our problems, and that's the place, of course, where we are making so much progress. I think about 100 years ago, about that time, the Woodrow Wilson progressive period, freedom got chopped into pieces. There were some people who defended personal liberties better, another group defended economic liberty, and it was a mishmash on what foreign policy ought to be, but we drifted away from minding our own business and staying out of foreign entanglements. But it has to be a unity. And the reason for this is the right thing to do. You have to have this philosophy that applies to all areas. But the reason why politically that is so important is that we can talk to everybody. If people can see that individual liberty and personal liberty, if you understand this, it's not intimidating. It shouldn't be threatening. It shouldn't be telling people how to run their lives and what their personal habits are. They have to live up with their responsibilities, though. That's important. But it doesn't tell people how to spend their money. It doesn't tell people what church they have to go to. So why shouldn't we have people, a diverse group of people coming together? And I think I see that more and more, that their true diversity will be served by the coming together in the defense and the use of liberty. The diversity that they talk about now is forced diversity, and it preordained by some type of social engineers and saying this is the way we are going to mandate diversity. No, diversity means that you come together for one purpose: protecting liberty so that we can recognize it's our life to make it worthwhile, or it's our life to mess it up, and we can't blame anybody else if we do. Most important in a society that recognizes liberty is also this concept of self-preservation. If freedom is idealistic and sounds wonderful, but people are poor and they're unhappy and things aren't working well, people will always look to have somebody take care of them. That is a natural tendency, and that's what has prevailed for so long. But if self-preservation and caring for oneself and having a higher standard of living comes from a free society, that shouldn't be hard to sell. I think one of our biggest flaws as freedom fighters and libertarians and conservatives is that I think we do a lousy job arguing the moral case for liberty and the practical case for it. Because always, the opposition say, yeah, you guys are fine and dandy. You're rich and you can take care of yourself, but we care about people. We care about the poor, and that's why we have food programs and free housing and all these things. Yeah, and what do you give us? Detroit. That's what you give us. And that, again, is what's coming, and people are recognizing. I see no reason why we can't challenge all of history and the whole idea of human nature and the nature of government, because it's such a short history, it can change. The founders made an attempt and did do some wonders even back then. But there's no reason for us to say it's been that way for a long time. Governments will always be superior. Because, we've already have advanced through the stage where governments are in charge of all the wars. World War II sort of ended that. You have smaller units. You have what some people refer to as fourth generation warfare. You don't see armies marching up against each other. And so it's almost been taken away from the state. Well, that is good if they would only do the right thing. And that is the understanding that this works. You can have your freedom, you can have your prosperity, but you have a couple rules. The most important rule is you can't hurt anybody. Which means you can't use force. You can't force your neighbor what to do, and you can't use the government to go and force your neighbor to do something that they don't want to do if they're not hurting anybody. So non-aggression, the non-violent principle. And the left has used this. Martin Luther King used it in a positive way, in saying, that civil disobedience, peaceful disobedience is okay, and it rejects the use of force. And Gandhi was able to achieve a lot in that manner. So we have to understand the value of this and to emphasize this, but we have to get people to really believe in this. This doesn't mean everybody's going to believe in it, but if you have the leadership believing in it, who's going to influence the government and set a standard, and we reject the whole notion that we can police the world and have a welfare system that works forever and everybody's going to be prosperous. Well, it's not going to happen. So if people can get to the point where they believe they'll be better off, then I think they will. But not only will we be better off in a system like that, I think its human satisfaction would be amazing. I've always said, and I truly believe, that if I could live in a truly free society that I visualize, and I was poorer, and the whole country was poorer, I'd still want to live in that society. I don't want the government and everybody else telling me what to do. But the wonderful thing about it is we don't have to do that. The freer we are, the wealthier we are, the larger the middle class, the more prosperity, the less wars, for instance, and the more satisfaction. I know human nature is such that if they achieve something and they can take care of themselves, they feel better about themselves. Today, people don't feel better because all they do is fighting to get another handout. They can't feel good about that. And some of them are destitute and feel they can't go anywhere else because we put so much poverty on them. The other day, I saw a story in the New York Times which caught my attention. There was this lady from the inner city. She was working 2 jobs, and she wanted to take care of herself. And she was not on welfare. And she was living in a tenement house. I mean, she had no home. She was homeless, but she was working 2 jobs. But here it is. We create a system where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the people who try to do it, the wages never keep up with the cost of living. And then what does our government do to them? They say, oh, there's no inflation. There's no inflation. And the elderly, well, we can't even earn interest on our savings, and our cost of living is on. Oh, no, you're just kidding yourself. I was talking to one of the drivers when I was up in New York, and I said, it used to be, I heard a story that just to drive one of those cabs cost $60,000 for a medallion. I don't know if we have anybody from New York here, and I might verify this story because I have trouble believing this. And the driver looked around and he says, they don't cost $60,000 anymore. He claimed they cost $700,000. A couple years ago, the explanation was they were like $300,000, but in the infinite wisdom of our caretakers in the world and in New York said, oh, we want to limit the number of medallions. So the medallion circulates in the marketplace, and because there's a limit, of course, guess what? The price goes up. So that, and there's no inflation, huh? If you didn't have to pay $700,000 just to be able to drive a cab, you know, maybe in a free society, it wouldn't cost anything. Just go out and call yourself a cab. Start hauling people around. Well, we have still a lot of work to do, and I think that we should be very pleased, and we've had a lot of good advice over the years. You know, Samuel Johnson gave us some good advice. He says, don't worry about the majority. It doesn't take a majority, and I mentioned that. It takes a minority, and he called it an irate, tireless minority, starting brush fires of freedoms in the minds of men. The ideas of liberty aren't brand new. There was a start maybe 600 years ago with the Magna Carta, and things have come and gone. And even our own government here in the last few years want to repeal habeas corpus and challenge this. But there's been thoughts about freedom for a very long time. But refinement of it and a better understanding of economics exists today than it ever even did with Adam Smith. The world is different. We have this electronic communications, and people can communicate with each other rather than just through government. And like Victor Hugo said, an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by armies. And the time has come, the need is there. Everybody knows the need is there. I spent this last several days promoting a book on a subject that's dear to my heart, and that is homeschooling. And everywhere I went, liberal or conservative, said the schools are really messed up and something has to be done about it. Unfortunately, the other side is just like in economics. You know, all the things that they did to mess up the economy, they want to do more of. And there are some now. They say, well, it's messed up and, you know, the kids aren't learning, so let's get better testing. Let's have more testing. Let's get the United Nations involved and have a core curriculum for everybody. And then there are others that would like to opt out of the system, and there's a fertile field out there for every one of us to participate one way or the other. Probably homeschooling isn't for everybody, but it is an option. Private schooling is an option. But the one thing is we need more competition in the government school system, and we probably should have a lot less control of the unions in that system as well. But there are a lot of techniques. The other thing that I've worked on is the internet channel that I've been trying to spread the message. And that's still in its early stages, but it's growing all the time, and I hope I can perform well enough to make sure I can get the messages out there and invite even more people to be participating in having another vehicle. The great threat, of course, is when will the government come and crack down on us and give us these problems? So I'm keeping my fingers crossed because I don't understand the technology, but I'm sure hoping the people who really know the technology will be on our side and they can outfox the government when it comes for communication. The real goal of a free society, I talked about a sense of satisfaction, but it also provides the opportunity to seek excellence and virtue. In our personal lives, at least for me personally, that should be the goal. And that should be where the satisfaction comes from. And I think others, the opposition, I don't think the left are bad people. I think they're misinformed, and sometimes when I have to rationalize a bit and not get angry at Bernanke and others, I think they just had bad economic teachers. That was their problem. But to get excellence and virtue is something where true satisfaction can come from. But if governments get involved in trying to teach us everything and take care of us, they can't do it without taking away our liberties. And that's where and they fail. At the same time, they destroy our sense of self-reliance and self-satisfaction, and it makes for a very unhappy world. And Norm, I think, mentioned something that I talk about a lot, and I think it's very important because we can talk about all the problems, and they're very, very serious, and the answers aren't real easy. And we may, as a matter of fact, my belief is the economy is going to get a lot worse before we win this fight. But the one thing is that we have to make this effort and do whatever we can, because that satisfaction will come when we achieve this. And this is where we are today. But I see nothing but good signs outside of Washington. I see a few good signs because we know, and you've met with a few good members of the Congress, the House, and the Senate, and that is a big help and encouragement to us. But ultimately, the people have to know, and they have to know what's happening. And the responsibility is on everybody, but the responsibility is more on individuals like yourself, because you've arrived at a function like this, and you've been involved maybe a year, 2, 5, or 10 years in this movement. And I am convinced that personally, my opinion is that you have a greater moral responsibility, because most people live in a daze. The majority of people, football is the only thing, That's all right. I'm not against playing football. But no, they live in a daze in a sense that they're not too concerned about it. But the individuals who do lead make a big difference. And that is what we have to be encouraged by. And that is where we're making the progress. So I come down on the side of being optimistic, looking at a crisis. But why not say there's a crisis because there's a vacuum and we have an answer, and this is the answer, and it's a nonviolent answer, and it's one that incorporates everybody into it, and nobody has to feel that they're being excluded. And it means equal justice before the law instead of saying equal opportunity by redistributing the wealth and destroying productivity. That's what we have to reject. So my effort has been, meager in many ways, but very exciting in other ways, because I'm delighted to come and visit with you and express these views. And I'm also encouraged because you come and the opportunity. But I do know there's a job out there for you, and it's an important job. And I can't tell you what it is. A lot of people come and ask me, what should I do? I agree with you. Tell me what I have to do. And, my answer is sort of do whatever you want. Do whatever you want, but do something, because you'll be creative and do it in your own way, and you'll have certain techniques. I think people can be teachers and writers and who knows what. As start a new organization, just look at what Jeff has done with YAL. He got up and did it. So there's all kinds of things that can be done, but it is a race. It is a race that we're in place, because there will have to be a replacement. And if we let things slip, we can easily slip back to tyranny and statism and all the old-fashioned ideas. But to make this a true revolution that is successful, we have to understand it to make sure that freedom is on the side of victory in this revolution. Thank you very much. Thank you.